We did it. Thank you for your patience as we figured out our technical difficulties. Welcome, welcome. Good to see you. We figured it wouldn't be a Notion technical live stream
Yeah,
without some technical difficulties, would it?
yeah,
So
good deal.
excited to be here. I'm excited to be here with my husband, Ben, who is a fellow Notion expert and I don't know, formulas warlock wizard. Ben is the one that I go to with all my formula questions because obviously Notion has introduced their new syntax. And if you don't have a little bit of programming know-how, it can be might seem pretty intimidating. I'm definitely intimidated by it. So Ben, I'm super excited to get a chance to, you know, tap into your warlock brain, answer some
I love it.
questions, show people what's possible, right?
It was like when you were on Tiago's channel the other day, you were like so excited to be able to teach him something. And now I feel like super privileged to be able to teach the Notion Queen, Marie Pullen herself, something.
Yay! Yeah, I'm excited to learn a
Awesome.
few things. We also have some pretty exciting guests here today that we thought might be really fun for folks to get a chance to actually chat with some of the people who influenced this feature at Notion. So let's add Stephen and Yash, and maybe Ben, you could introduce, because I know that you've been a big part of kind of shaping the formula engine or sort of doing a lot of QA, and so I'd love to just kind of have you introduce and talk a little bit about your experience.
Welcome.
Hey guys, good to see you.
Hello.
Hey y'all.
Yeah, why don't you guys start with an introduction and just tell us what your involvement is with the formulas at Notion.
Yeah, I could probably start with that one. So we're both software engineers. I probably went through this really common programming path where you start out being obsessed with games, playing games every day, and you're like, I want to make games one day. And then you stumble into programming and you're like, wow, this is so much fun. And then so I think I was 12 years old. I got really into PHP. Ben, I know you're familiar with this one.
Mm-hmm.
WordPress, PHP, all things web. And then started looking into what do you major in? What do you want to do? And programming just seemed like the natural thing. I lived in Ohio for quite a while, went to Ohio State, go Bucks, and then I moved to Seattle for a while, and then to San Francisco for the job at Notion. I've been using Notion for, I think, 3 years now. And first time I used it, I know Marie, you've written a lot about ADHD. I definitely have ADHD as well. And I was like, I'd been trying Wunderlist, Asana, every software in existence. And I was like, this really isn't clicking for me or isn't putting all the pieces together. And I'm just kind of adding more and more software to my, suite, trying to figure out how things, tie together. And when I had first started using Notion, I was like, wow. And then I started using it for everything, movie tracking, to-do lists. And it was like fun in itself, which is really different than using productivity apps where you're just like, oh, this is to do a task. It's very like functional. But to change that into something where you're like, hey, I'm actually creating things as I'm making my life better. And there's this really cool feedback loop. And so ultimately I was like, I want to work here. I've been working at Facebook for the time in Seattle, and it was like time for a new job. And I moved to San Francisco, and here I am today. So I've been at Notion for a year now on the databases team. So that's like the front end facing databases product, things like Kanban boards, timeline view, tables, of course, and all the features that come with it. So that's like sub items, dependencies and formulas, which we're talking about today. And so Yash and I worked on formulas for a while, and I'll let Yash introduce himself now.
Yeah, for sure. So like Stephen mentioned, I'm Yash. I'm also from Ohio, actually, from Cincinnati. But I
Me
go to
too.
the University. Oh, no way! Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I go to the University of Michigan. I am a senior year. I'm in my senior year. But I've been interning for Notion for the past 8 months. So I had the opportunity to work on a ton of really cool stuff. I built the weekly calendar view. Worked on a couple of random collection things. And yeah, for the past 6-ish months, I've been pretty much full time on formulas. So it's been a really rewarding experience. And it ties in a lot with what I'm doing at college, which is specifically like programming language research. So I've been working on a lab on campus. I was using Notion for like lab stuff, using it for notes. And then I realized like this broader vision of Notion as a tool for more than just document editing and, as a tool for creating and for making apps. And that just really resonated with me. So Notion was my dream job. I remember like looking before Notion opened internships. They historically like have never taken interns. They just started this year. But yeah, super lucky to have had the opportunity to join the company for the past few months.
Amazing. Yeah, I don't think I realized that either of you were from Ohio. I grew up in Cincinnati. My brother went to Ohio State, so I'm a bunch of Ohio boys on the call. It's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So from my perspective, like I had the honor as a Notion ambassador of getting early access to formulas, and it was a super cool experience because the formulas were kind of introduced to us in a very early stage, and we got to see kind of like what the team was thinking and like where it was going, and get access to these exciting features. And then, we had this really amazing collaboration where we're able to provide feedback, and we're all of the people that really know formulas really well. We're saying, oh, it'd be really great if we could do this. It'd be great if we could do this. And Stephen and Yash were so receptive to all of our feedback, and it was super cool to get that real time, like, hey, this is shipping this week, and so we're asking for things and getting them right away, and finding bugs and working on those things together. So it's been like a really cool collaborative experience between the ambassadors community and the Notion engineers. So I was really honored to be part of that, and it was amazing to watch you guys work. And I know like our viewers here are super excited about formulas, obviously, and are all appreciative of all your hard work. I'd like to ask you both two questions. The first is, what are you most proud of with the formulas feature? And the second would be like, what's the most challenging thing that you guys fixed during this process or built? What was the hardest thing that you're super excited to have solved? And then I'm also going to invite folks in the chat to ask some questions as well, if you have any questions for the Notion folks here.
Yeah, this might get a little bit technical, but as a web developer dealing with content editable and just the editor itself, and trying to figure out all the shenanigans with multi-line editing, when you do a shift enter, what happens? How do you render line breaks and tabs, and even like we have this like auto tabbing feature where if you make a new line, you have to do the number of tabs based on the previous tab, or the previous line's number of tabs. And so there's all these like little details that go into the editor. And when you first look at the editor and you look at the final mux, you're like, that doesn't look too bad. Like I can do that in like a couple of weeks. But then you take a step back and you're like, wait a second. Like there are all these little gotchas and things that people will run into if you don't really put the thought into like every single little detail, whether that's like, oh, I don't want to be tabbing 8 times when I get to the next line, or I need to figure out how up and down work with autocomplete versus the editor pane itself, or when I expand, what happens, like how does a wrap happen? And so there's all these like little details that at first you're like, hey, I can build that. I've built things like that before, and then you're like, oh wait, this is actually 100 things. It's not just like one thing.
And Stephen, I'm curious too, like you're also dealing with an audience of people who are very strongly opinionated, and people that maybe have certain opinions on how something should be. I'm sure you got to see that with collaborating with Ben. And so that must add another layer to it, where you're like, okay, we're thinking that we want to optimize this way, but then you get people who are kind of angry that you've changed something on them. Like, how do you either do that focus testing, or like, how do you figure out that the idea that you have is the best path forward?
One of the examples there would be, like with new formulas, it doesn't update in all of the columns at once. And my first thinking was like, oh, that's really hard, because now I can't test like multiple outputs at once. But then the response was something along the lines of, yeah, but now we have this live preview, so you could see the thing like in real time right next to the formula you're writing. And it's also a huge performance benefit. So I'm imagining like as engineers, you're often having to make these trade-offs between like, hey, we need to like reduce some of this like performance, stuff going on the client side for formulas, but still provide that real-time feedback to the user. So there's like some trade-offs and things there. So even those are like, often those product decisions are kind of like masking engineering decisions. And so those are like the right choice to make there is often really challenging, I can imagine.
For sure. I'd say working in Notion, there's kind of this endless trade-off discussion with every little feature, because everybody uses it so differently, right? Like you have people who might not be very technical, and they're opening formulas for the first time, and they're just like, what is this? Like, what is a function? What is a variable? I don't know any of these concepts. And then there are folks like y'all who are like, I'm gonna, use this, like crazy. I'm gonna have like
Bend
10
it to my
nested
will.
things. Yeah, exactly, right. And those audiences are so different. And so it's like a documentation. How do you write the right text in the right way? What words do you use? And I think it's been the biggest signal that's been important, I think, is y'all's feedback, like through the ambassador beta. It's like, if there are points where if you guys weren't getting something, how are folks who are, beginners going to get it if, the education isn't clear, if the UI UX isn't clear? So, there are times when we're like, oh, maybe this will work. And then we send it to you guys and you guys are like, I don't know if I get this. And then we're like, okay, we have to go back to the drawing board, think a little bit harder about all of this.
We had some fun questions pop up in the chat. Svaneland asks, how often did you cry when the ambassadors found a bug? Were there any tears on your end? Any hair pulling?
Oh gosh, if we cried every time the ambassadors found a bug, I think we would just be weeping for 3 weeks straight.
You'd be swimming through the Notion offices.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are testing every single feature and in crazy ways. Yeah. Josh, did you want to add anything about like the complex problems you dealt with?
Yeah, I definitely say like the thing that I'm the most proud about, and I also think this was the hardest thing about building formulas at Notion, was the backwards compatibility. And there's kind of like two axes to that. I'd say the first one is, like we don't want the user to feel thrashed when they open up the editor and see something that they don't recognize, a language that they don't recognize, so on and so forth. So there were so many decisions to make there. Like, firstly, just in terms of the syntax of the language and the semantics, like what does this language do? We want to introduce all these new features and, give you lists and mapping and blocks and people, but we don't want to make it unfamiliar. So there's a lot of thought just at like the, at the whiteboard, like in terms of planning how to build out formulas that was really, really well done. And I want to shout out like Paul Shen, who's a researcher with the lab called Ink and Switch. And he joined Notion for a few months back when automations work was getting off the ground with the buttons and status automations, and helped, not just design automations, but design formulas as well. So both Stephen and I have been building off of his work. He's an incredible person. Like, you should go check out his website or some of his work later. And so that, along with the converter, which is when you open up your Notion formula editor now, we have an algorithm which will convert your old formula into a new formula, which is a really tricky problem. It's something that you would see in like a compilers or like programming language class, in school. So that was a very hard problem to solve. And I'm really proud that, the converter at the end of the day, like we didn't get I don't think we got a single report from, the tens of thousands of people who have converted their formulas that their formulas changed. So that's like the first thing that I'm very proud of, and also was quite challenging. The second part is like preserving backwards compatibility with documentation. So, the whole prop thing, where in the old language to reference a property, you had to call like a special function called prop. So all the docs, probably hundreds of thousands of formulas out there on the internet, were using this syntax that we deprecated in 2.0. And instead of, the function prop, we have these like little chips that you can use to reference properties. And so this was something I identified like very early on when I was working on this project, is that we need some way to keep that documentation live, and also just, make it possible to share formulas, because it's really hard to share like a screenshot of a chip. Like, it doesn't really make much sense what that means. And that was a really, really challenging technical problem to solve, which is the current experience where you can take a formula that you saw, 3 years ago, copy it in, it'll have prop in it, paste it in, and you'll get like an updated formula with all the nice special tokens where you need them. So I had to get really into the guts of like, how does copy and paste work? Like, how do we do it in Notion? Because Notion has we have our own like copy and paste system built on top of like your browsers. And then the most challenging part of this whole thing, which is something that I just pushed like maybe a day or two ago, was very technical. Like, basically, if you had a array and that array was accessing properties inside of the array, there was like you would use the syntax for current.prop and then the property name. Getting that to actually resolve to the right database was a really, really tricky challenge, because the old approach, which was broken, was I would just look over the entire formula, look for any calls to prop, and then just replace, like, if that property existed on the parent database that the formula was written on, just replace with the property on that database. But that obviously doesn't work if you're accessing a property on a relation.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I had to build something to get into like a little bit of programming language theory, which walks the abstract syntax tree of the formula and basically figures out what is the current collection in context right now. And then based on that, resolves to the right token. Also, collection is like the internal name that we use for databases at Notion. So maybe that makes it a little bit.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
might flip up and say collection instead of database throughout this
Yeah,
call. So
you guys have your own internal lexicon for sure. I'm sure a lot of our audience probably understood next to nothing of what you just said, but I'm really excited to have the current .prop reference fixed when I copy and paste, because that's been like now that I'm sharing more complex examples with the public, people are like, I have to, we were having to specify like, oh, you got to fix this after you paste, and now like that's been wrapped up. It's super exciting. So I'm really pleased to hear all of your, because I'll admit, like when you first shipped the feature to us, I was like, wait, you're like, it's not going to be backwards compatible. And then I'm like trying to figure out like, wow, this is an incredibly complex thing to solve for, like, and the timeline that you gave us of shipping it, I was like, I don't know that I would be able to figure this out in a couple of months. So I'm like super impressed with, where you started, what you delivered to us initially, and like the appreciation for like how like, how much you just stuck to it and got so much done at the launch is just super impressive. So mass kudos to both of you and the docs team, Zoe and crew, for getting all that wrapped up in the time that you had. Very impressive.
Thank you so
I know.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we couldn't have done it without y'all for sure.
Yeah.
Like, pushing us on backwards compatibility, helping us with bugs and everything.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. It shows like the feature works and it's really fun to use, and it's like really opened up so much wealth of information in our Notion spaces where, previously we had to do these like kind of hacky workarounds, like to figure out how many relations are attached to this page. We would have to count the commas in the coerced string version of that list, and then remove anything that wasn't a comma, and then do a length call on that. And, and now we can just say task.length, and it's like, we have that information. It's so cool. I
know we've got some questions around, actually getting into some of the meat of it and seeing some demo. And so, Stephen and Yash, you're welcome to kind of stick around if you're curious, or answer some questions in the chat. But I think we should dive into some of actually show people, what these formulas look like, and answer any questions that people might have around how to build something specific. And I think, Ben, you've got a demo in mind that we can dig into.
Yeah, we can play around a little bit and just talk about formulas in general and what's new compared to 1.0. So somebody just asked, is this a workshop about formulas or a webinar about how Notion built formulas? It's both. Welcome. We're going to get into the actual building of the thing. And definitely if you you can follow my channel too. You can find my name in the chat there or whatever. And there's a good overview of Formulas 2.0 that kind of walks you through all the new stuff and we're going to see today.
Yeah,
let's do it.
Thanks so much for joining us, boys.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think we're just so grateful to the community, because it really wouldn't have been possible to ship this feature without you guys. So yeah, thank you all to the viewers, and Ben and Marie, obviously. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much, Yash.
Yep.
Cheers. All right, let's dig in.
Okay. So it'll be, I guess, if I'm presenting, we'll get Marie, you'll have to kind of like have a look in the chat to see if there's any questions
Definitely
coming up. But otherwise, we're just kind of get into it here. So everybody can, looks like I'm just checking the feed here, making sure that, they can see my screen. Cool. So this is the formula library and the course that I'm working on called Formula Fundamentals 2.0. It's a total rebuild of the one I did before. And we're going to use this teams, projects, and tasks. This is what I used in my previous video to do some formula examples. So you can see here, and I'm going to set up the context a little bit here so that it's clear like what we're doing. So I've got a database of teams, and the teams have many projects. So there's a relation to the projects database. And then, of course, the projects database is related to our tasks database. So we can attach tasks to this as well. And so, we know a little bit about formulas, but let's take a look at what the new editor looks like. So I'm going to add a formula to my task database to start. And we can click to open this. And the first thing that we're going to notice is the new editor is quite different. There's this little equals thing on the screen, and this is the live preview area. So this is kind of what I was discussing before, where if we type a formula in like 1 + 1, the live preview is going to show us 2 as a result. But you'll note that, and this is new for Formulas 2.0, that we don't see the live preview update in real time in the column. So I have to hit done or type command, which is command plus enter on Mac. And then we see the formula update. So if you've never used formulas before, formulas are basically a programming language. It has all kinds of different stuff like math, and you can calculate things. We can do things with formulas like reference other properties in the database and put them together with other properties. So it allows us to do a little bit of what something like Excel does. So this is kind of like, using column references in Excel and doing a spreadsheet calculation or something like that on them. But most formulas, Notion's databases are different from like a typical spreadsheet software in that like we typically have to have a single row that we can work on. And when we want to do things in aggregate, we have to connect them to a different row or a different database so that we can pull information through into the current database. So everything new in Formulas 2.0, we'll talk about today. But basically, I want to start by saying that Formulas 2 is a superset of Formulas 1. And what that means is that the entire language of Formulas 1 exists in 2.0. There's been a few key changes, such as when I'm working with an end date, when I want to get the end of a date, we used to write this function called end. And you'll see here that if I type the function end, it actually tells me in the error here that the function end was renamed to date end. So the team's done a really good job at like if there is a breaking change in the formula language, there's usually like a transfer path to Formulas 2. So, I want to use date end instead. So you can see as I start typing it, it suggests it in the sidebar here. And these are the functions that I can use. So everything exists in 2 that existed in 1. So if you have existing Formulas 1 knowledge, you can just start using it right away. There's no like changes really to the stuff, so you can do all of the here's your true and false built-ins, and you have all of your function calls down here. So same if statements and all that, but now we have different functions like ifs that have been added and things like that. And we'll get into that a little bit here. Marie, did you have any specific examples that you would want to check out, or should I just kind of proceed with?
No, happy for you to proceed. And if folks have specific questions, whether anything's been tripping you up with formulas or anything that you want to see, like I know there's sort of like this big open-ended, we could do anything. Like I think what's really interesting to me is the way that formulas allow us to kind of bypass rollups. And do that kind of aggregate data. So I think there's just lots of interesting use cases. So I definitely love to hear kind of what people are curious about.
Let's talk about the rollups thing, because I think that'll get into one of the newer features, which is lists. So if you're familiar with any kind of programming, and I think Yash called them arrays, which is like kind of a programmery term, but in Notion they're referred to as lists. And the cool thing about lists in Notion in Formulas 2.0 is that these properties that typically back in the day when I created a formula, for example, in Teams, and I referenced that lead property, it would have just turned it into a text string. But like now it actually, it would just turn it into text. But now these things are actually interactive. So I can actually perform functions on these, and I can actually filter on these. And if I say filter on the formula here, you'll see that I can actually pick me. So this allows us to do something like, and I demoed this in my video, but let's say I had something like, let's add another person property here, and we'll call this accountable. And then maybe even this like lead one is responsible. And so if you were doing the RACI framework, for example, which is, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So now I could have individual properties for all those. So maybe, maybe Ben is responsible and Cloud and Marie are accountable. We can actually now take this formula and we can use the concat function, which you can see is this returns the concatenation of multiple lists, which concatenation means basically join them together. So I could say concat, and I could pick responsible and then hit comma and then hit accountable. and it joins all of those people together. And so maybe I just create a formula that's called team now. So now I can actually filter on that. So I could say, if I had a me page or a dashboard for myself, I could say, show me all of the team members show me all the teams where I'm included on the team. So now we can actually filter on, and previously in Formulas 1, I would have had to just enter a text string like Benjamin Borowski, because that
so it's not dynamic.
Right. So now it's dynamic. And the same thing goes with projects as well. And
there was a great question that came in from Marcus, whether it's sort of related to what you're showing or not, but just this, what's the biggest thing that is solved now for you with 2.0? So like, what's been possible for you in your space? And
lists for sure. And I want to do a little sidebar here about the property, because Yash talked about it, the translating property function call to a actual property token. So there's this new concept in Notion. And so what he's talking about is that previously we used to use this function called prop, and there's a thing, it's not actually documented anymore, but it still works. So it tells us that prop is not defined, but that's not entirely true. So I could actually say prop, and then if I wanted to get that responsible property, as soon as I type the final closing parentheses, it automatically turns it into a property token reference. So we don't actually use that function anymore. So I can literally just type responsible and hit enter, and now I actually am referencing that. So there's no like function calls to get access to the properties. So that's like a little sidebar there. Let's revert this. Revert. Cool. So you can see.
I'm assuming you find the writing is faster for you, like just the way to, accessing things.
Oh yeah, big time. And it just makes things a lot easier to read, because I don't have to like see that like prop, all that extra stuff. I'm talking about the things here directly. And one of the other cool features I want to highlight here in Notion that I think is not necessarily a feature unlock, but it's like a brain unlock for me as a programmer, and the way that we read these things is so much easier. For me at least, where we have this thing called dot notation syntax. And so any function, for example, we have this new function in Formulas 2.0 called name. And this actually returns the name from a Notion account. So I can call the name function, and I could pass the responsible person. Let's see, and this has to be first because it's a list, and it returns the name of that person on the account. So you can actually get the name and the email from a Notion account object now. But you'll see here that I called this with dot first, which is basically we're saying, so I can use the function first, which is a function that works on lists, and I could say first and pass it responsible. And so I'm saying like, give me the first person in this list, because these person properties are actually lists. Or I can say responsible dot first. And then if I have an object like Notion account here, I could call dot name on that as well. So there's like two different ways to call functions now. One is by passing the object that you want to like manipulate into the function as the first argument, or you can call a function on the object itself. So it allows us to chain our function calls together. So I can do stuff like this, where I like to do this on these new lines because the editor now allows us to format our code. So basically responsible is a list of people. I'm using the first function to return the first person in the list. And then I'm calling the name function on that return in order to get the name from it. And now I've got a string that's just Benjamin Borowski. So I might even do something like this, where I call the split function on that list, and I maybe split it on the comma. So that, right? So I'll split it on the space. And that gives me a new list of two items. One is Benjamin and one is Borowski. And then I can further call first on that, and that gives me that first name. So like this is now a function that gives me like the first name of the person or something like that. And there's lots, this is a basic example, but there's lots more complexity that we can do here.
There was a question that popped up that maybe is kind of related in terms of how we chain this information together. You can let me know if this is related or not. But Notion ASMR was saying, can I display the name of a property when using a sum rollup using formulas, specifically for my gallery and board view? I think I know what they mean in terms of like,
say that differently.
A journal sum where it's like, number of times exercise. So you're actually seeing the title of a thing, because I know when you're displaying numbers and sums in Notion, you don't always have the context visible. It's not always easy to see what that number is representing. So could a formula kind of help us show?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I could maybe even like answer a bit of Marcus's pinned question here, which is, what is the biggest thing that is solved for you? What's possible? And I think for me, it's the ability to basically look through relations as far as you want to go, essentially. So for example, I've got this daily journal thing where I have a GitHub action that runs in the morning every day, and it pulls data from my Oura ring, which is like this ring that you wear so that you have, it basically tracks your sleep and your readiness and your activity scores and gives you these numbers. And so my journals get created automatically via API, and I plug these numbers in. So you can see here's my scores. Didn't have very good activity today, 75. So these are my 3 scores today that are manually, not manually, automatically added to this journal via the API. Now, previously in what I would had to do, so here's my agenda or whatever, I used to have to create a roll up here that would calculate the median or the average of those scores across all of the journal entries, right? But in order to and the thing is that you can't roll up another roll up. And so what you would have to do is create a second formula here, turn that roll up into a number, and then you could then reference it at the next level up. So
a lot of craft, a lot of properties that were just kind of acting as these go-betweens, right?
So what it means, and I haven't done this yet, but like, here's the next level up from the agenda. So I have a journal, a weekly agenda, and then a monthly thing. So right now I have these roll-ups that are pulling through the readiness, all of the readinesses from all of the agendas and calculating the median score. Or like for somebody's like total points or whatever, I could calculate the sum. So it's 327 or something like that, right? So I can calculate my median score here, which is what I kind of want, either median or maybe we'll do like average. That's an easier one to do. But what I would do now with formula is like, I don't need any of that, the interim rollups or formulas in between these 3 things. So I can go from the month all the way down to the daily journal and get information. So I'll show you how that works. And this is going to get complex because we're getting into some list stuff now. So the first thing is that we've got the ability to, we're going to reference the agenda to start. So I'm going to click agenda, and you'll see here that automatically it shows me my 4 agendas. So these are my agendas here. This is a list of page objects. And again, like the cool thing about formula is like, if I hit done here, these are all actually interactive objects still.
That's
like
huge.
In the context of Formulas 1, they would have turned this into a piece of text and you couldn't click it anymore. So what Formula calls these are like rich objects. So like selects and pages and people, they all come through now as very like interactive objects. So we don't lose that. And we can manipulate this. So we can filter this down and show only certain things that we want to, and then do calculations on them. So that's the first step here is I want to get all my agendas. And the next thing I want to do is like, what I actually want from each agenda is the journal entries in each of those agendas. So there's going to be 7 of those in each. And the function we're going to use here to access that is map. So I'm going to call map on this object. And what map does is the name of map comes from the JavaScript name and a bunch of other programming languages. But what map does is it basically is like returning a new list, and it's giving you, it's based on the list. So for each of these agendas, I want to do something in this expression, which I'm going to pass to map. And whatever the expression evaluates to is what is added to the new list. So if that wasn't confusing, like I could do, let's do a simple example here, agendas.map. And so this is each of these functions when you're operating on a list receives what is called the current context. So basically current is going to represent each item in the list as it ticks through the list. So the first time I hit it goes through this process, it's going to give me that first item in the agendas list. So it'll be August 28th. And then the next time current is now evaluating to the next item. So it's basically looping over this list. And we have 2 variables that we can access here. One is the index and one is the current item in the list. So for example, if I just returned the index here, it's going to actually give me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 as a list. So those are in many programming languages, lists start with 0 when you're counting them. So it's called 0 indexed. And now that I've got a list, I can work with it. So I could call the first item on that list and get 0. But what we actually want is, I want to return for each of the agendas, I want current, and then as soon as I type dot after current, it's now offering me properties on the agendas. So I can actually access everything that I can see on a journal from this relation now. And we've never been able to do that before in formulas, like access a property through a relation. We had to do rollups and then pass that data up from the database. So what I actually want to do is return the journal entries. And I could actually close this here, and we're going to see, here's all my journal entries. Let me hit done here, and we'll see, like, that's everything, right? So this is basically like, we just created a rollup that was like, this is a rollup that is like, let's actually add that rollup here. So let's say I actually add a rollup, and I would be selecting the agendas, and I would be picking the name and then show original, right? But like, because we can't roll up a rollup, you can't get through to that, you know.
And you can't click on those; they're not interactive, right? So it shows kind of the limitations of the rollup.
So I actually need to select the journal entries and then show original. So that's the exact same setup, right? But now what from here? I can't do anything further from here. Like, this is as far deep as you can go, right? I can't change anything. I can't, like, I couldn't really do much with this rollup. So what Formulas 2 allows us to do is keep going with this. So
how deep can you go?
Exactly. So like, you can count the length of this, and it says that there's 4 items, and like, that doesn't look right, does it? It seems like there's quite a few more items. And the reason that this is because journal entries is a list and agendas is a list. And so when we call map and we return another list, we're actually building a list of lists. So now we actually have a list of each item in the list is going to be another list of journal entries. And so in order to get the actual journal entries from this, I need to call flat on this. And that's actually going to flatten it into a single list of items. It's the same. It looks the same in the output. And this is kind of a gotcha here, that Notion doesn't show like any kind of visualizations for lists to help you understand the depth that they're in. So that's a little tricky, but if I call flat and then length on this, we'll see I have 28 journal entries.
Ben, there's a question that popped up that might relate to kind of how you're talking about lists and defining this. So Lofty Concept was asking why multiply function is not working on a list, multiplying elements of a list with each other. And I think that's related to lists not actually being a number or something like that. I don't know if you want to take a stab at answering that.
So it depends on what you're, I would have to see what you're trying to do here, but like, you know, like these are page objects, and like, you can't multiply a page object by something. So we have to get numbers out of them. And sometimes, like in certain cases, like you have to either use the toNumber function to convert to a number before you can do math operations on certain things. But I think we'll see this a little bit differently as we explore this a little bit differently. So the thing with this is, now I actually need information from my journal entries. So I'm using map, and we're pulling through all the journal entries, and I'm going to actually use map on the journal entries again. So we're doing a nested map. And so current is now a journal entry. And from the journal entry, we want the readiness score. So now we have a big list of readiness scores, right? Let's call length on that and see what we got. Still 4, so we need to flatten that. And that length is 28 items. And now I can say, so now I have a list of scores. So we have pulled through all of the readiness scores throughout, and these are from the journals. So these are 2 databases removed from the source. And so now that I have that number, now that I have that list, I could start doing calculations on it. So I could say, what was the max score I had? And I could say max. And the max score I had was 88. The min score I had was 66. So I can do these calculations on it. And so, you know, what this allows us to do is recreate rollups. So if I wanted to do the average, I would need to know how many items there are, and the sum of those things. So I'm going to use another new Notion function here, feature, which is setting variables so that I don't have to repeat myself over and over again to get this information. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the lets function. And you'll see here that it says lets assigns variable values to multiple variables and evaluates the expression using those variables. That's a kind of a hard thing to wrap our heads around. So let's actually just use it and we'll see what it does. So I'm going to actually just make a blank function call here over 2 lines. So let's basically receives variable and value pairs. And then the last item in the function call is what is returned by the function. So I could say a and then comma, and then let's say a is equal to 1. So that defines the a variable and sets it to 1. So now anytime I use a in the future, it's always going to return 1. I'll do another line to set another variable b and set this to 2. And then that, like I said, that last line is where we define the expression that gets returned. So I can now use a. So I could say a plus b times 2, and we get 5. So we're setting a variable and then we're using it as a return variable. And we can set as many variables as we want here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, I'm going to set a variable called scores, and then I'm going to set it to what I had before. And now I can actually use scores and return it, right? So I've got my scores there. So so I might even set another variable that is like total, and I could say scores dot length, right? And then theoretically I could use total here, and it would get 28. And because scores is a list, I can actually use list operations on it. And list conveniently has a thing called sum on it. So I could say, so how do we do an average? We do like scores dot sum divided by total. And it gives me an average of 68 there. Does that seem right?
Seems low.
Yeah,
Looking at those numbers.
Might have to flatten this one again too. Let's see. Which one do I need to flatten? Not sure why that's not working. I might have some empty values in there or something. Or did I do the math wrong?
Don't ask me. Hopeless over here.
Anyway, there's probably an empty value in there somewhere that I'm not seeing.
Is the length correct of the number of?
Might be.
Like with I know 0 being part of a list. I don't know.
Anyway, so yeah, and then in terms of like utilizing these numbers, I can then do my calculations, which would be like we would want to, if we wanted to say round it to the nearest 100th or something, I can do this kind of stuff. So I get 68.93. Yeah.
Lou saying this is getting difficult for me. Don't worry, me too, Lou. It's super complex, right? But it shows you kind of, I'm beginning to see why you've been so excited about it, because especially with all the journal tracking and feelings, and Marcus was saying, can I use this to find out like how often was I angry in the month? Like you can start to see the power of it's complex, but once you figured it out, it seems pretty crazy what you can do to report, like automatically report all this stuff that we collect.
Yeah. So it says there's only 24 items in the list. So I must have some empty ones that I'm not filtering out. So again, that might be something where I assign another variable here where I say scores dot filter. Let's see if this works. Current empty. And I need to ask to check that the score is not empty. Yeah, there we go. Now I get a total of 24. That's exactly what it was. Thank you. Who was that? Etta Brown. You're a champ. So now I can do the scores dot sum and divide that by the scores dot length. I don't even really need that variable, and that seems a little more accurate, about at 80, which is not bad.
Okay, question. I'm assuming you can do this because it does seem like you can, but let's say you wanted to give yourself a number that summed up the readiness, the sleep, and the activity for like a single number. I'm assuming that's something you can like keep going down and pull multiple properties to create an average.
100%. Yeah. So I could reuse this function multiple times. So I might even say like, this is my readiness, and I got agenda.map current journal entries or whatever. And, I might actually, this stuff here could be extracted out to a variable too, so I don't have to repeat myself too much. And, so this would be readiness. I'm going to reassign that. And yeah, so now we have our, and then I could say readiness score. So need to change those too. So I would repeat these 3 lines at the top for each of my 3 scores, and then I could combine them together into one score and do an average or a median calculation on that. And how that looks is like if I go back to my journal here, here's an example of a median calculation where, so again, I'm taking the journal entries and I'm getting the readiness scores and I'm filtering them by where they're not empty, and I'm sorting them. So that's another cool thing that we can do in language is we can sort them. So doing a median calculation is like finding the middle item in there. And if the length is divisible by 2, then it's like, you have to do the calculation like combining the 2 middle values and dividing that by 2. So this basically returns the median score. And I can follow up later, but I have a link to on my gist, which has formulas for each one of the Notion rollups. So you can recreate these rollups for yourself if you want.
I feel like even though this is very intimidating, I think back to math class and how maybe I would have been able to wrap my head around some of these concepts if I had something concrete like this, that like, okay, I understand why we're doing this thing, right? Having something like a reason to learn the math and to understand what's happening.
Yeah. So, and again, this can be applied in different contexts too. So, and it's really cool when we get into projects and stuff. So for example, we'll go back to our teams thing and we'll add a formula here. And I've done this demo before, but this will be team tracker formula. So team tracker allows us to see what's going on with the team's projects and tasks. And so I might access projects and we'll map over that. And I'll take the current project as we're iterating through it, and we want the tasks. So this formula, if we flatten it, gives us all of the tasks that the team is responsible for, because we're pulling through all of the tasks through all of the projects. Now, what if we only wanted the
incomplete tasks?
Incomplete tasks. So let's do the let's thing again, and I'm going to say tasks, and then I'm going to return that. So this is exactly the same thing we just wrote. It's just in variable syntax. So now I can say all tasks, and then I would say unfinished tasks. And we can take all tasks because it's a variable, and we can use the filter function. And so as we're iterating through the task, we want to say we return the filter function, basically anything you return in the expression. If it's true, then it will be included in the new list that you're building. And if it's false, it won't be included in the new list you're building. So I could say current.status, and this is the status on the task. And I could say does not equal done. And then we'll close that there. What did we do wrong? Task is not defined. Because I called it all tasks. So now we can see the unfinished tasks. Let's see how many of those there are by calling length on that. So there's 6. And if I just delete that and I return those, we're going to see the item team tracker changes, right? So that gives us all the tasks, and this gives us the unfinished tasks. And so in order to figure out, we actually need to switch this to finished tasks, and we'll say equals done. And to figure out how far along the team is with all of their work, we do finished task divided by all tasks dot length. And we need to call dot length on this one. And that gives us the 0.3 repeating, which as I did before, we can round that, multiply it by the place that we want, and then divide it by the place that we want. And that gives us a nice round number. And then, of course, because Notion is smart enough to know that we're returning a number here, we can get into the number editing stuff. And so I can make this a percent with a tracker. So this tells me how well my team is doing across the board, and it updates in real time. And again, like with this type of thing, we would have had to create rollups and formulas in projects in order to calculate each project's progress and then further roll that up into teams. So it allows us to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. You know, and you can continue to go deep or even refer back to the parent relation to capture information about that. For example, I was doing, let's see, like self tags. Let's go back to our solves. I was doing a solve for somebody recently that was kind of interesting, which is related items. So this one's kind of interesting where, for example, I've got this tools database and I've got like iPhone, Android, and Nokia phones, and they're related to a tags database, which has them all tagged as device. And this person was trying to figure out, given that relation, how do I show tools that are related to that tag, but disinclude this tag? And this is kind of neat. It allows us to say, let's look through the topics, and we're mapping over the topics. And for each topic, we're returning the current tools, like so pointing back to it. And we're basically filtering out current.id, which says like, don't include the page that has the same ID as the page that we're running this function on, and then flatten and sorting that list. So this gives us a related items kind of thing with a foreign database. And so, yeah, you can see here that Android and Galaxy X, or Android and the Nokia phone, are related to the iPhone phone through this topic, you know, because I've associated them here, but it disincludes this one each time.
It's a really great use case. Like I'm already seeing how in my library and tagging system, I do a lot of things where if I've tagged something and there's like related authors that talk about this tag and stuff, I have a lot of roll-ups, but I can't click on the authors' names and some of that stuff. So I could really see how like switching a lot of those roll-ups to these formulas would give me a lot more flexibility for pulling in better data.
Yeah. And these are all, you know, because these are all just like things that I can click now and access that information, where it would have been, we would have lost that formatting in previous times.
We have some folks that are very excited about your course and just wondering when it's coming out.
Yeah, the courses, I just finished the course last night. And so next week is going to be me cleaning up some stuff, doing QA, and I have to do some infrastructure work in order to distribute it in our Notion space, because we probably have one of the most complex permission setups in Notion history, in the Notion Mastery course. And so there's a fair bit of group and permissions dynamics that I have to work through, but we're going to be rolling out beta, at least to the Notion Mastery students, probably sometime next week, and then a week or two later to the public. So I'm really excited. It's pretty cool. I'll give you a little preview here. This is all the stuff you're going to learn. So we have intro, we have using and converting properties, and we get into conditions, working with strings, and like it's a very exercise driven course. So we get a template and we go through and we do the examples together from a very, very, very rudimentary level to being able to do the stuff that I've been demoing so far in the course. And it's like, it's written from a perspective of me being a programmer and wanting to introduce programming concepts to people who might not be familiar with the terminology. So when Yash comes on and says something like abstract tree walking or something, like that sounds like something out of Lord of the Rings, but like I understand what he's saying, but like, and I think that a lot of times people are, I've had another Notion ambassador saying like, I just don't have the language yet to be able to describe what I'm trying to do when I'm asking for help. So like having that, like those, what's the difference between a list and an array? Like, what am I looking at here? Like can be really helpful. So fun little course coming together. Definitely lots more to do there, and it'll be coming out soon.
Very cool. Happy to open it up to more questions or use cases or whatever's going to make the most sense. And sorry if I've missed anybody's questions that popped in. I know
Let's
Marcus
actu-
was, yeah. go
Yeah,
ahead.
if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. But there's some other things that I would love to show, like that we haven't really talked about yet, which I think I can do a more simple demo that people like. I did a little screenshot of this a couple
Yeah, like
days
your
ago.
styling switcher or
Yeah. So like if we're talking about, for example, these, let's mess around with some, we'll create a new project here. New project, and let's add some tasks to it. Do this, do that, and do the other. So this is a use case I think that a lot of people will appreciate. So let's put we'll set 1 to today. We'll set 1 to 20th. Let's do 1 tomorrow. And then we'll do future 1 and a past 1. So this is this will be our task tracker. And what do we want to build here? We wanted to build and I'm going to duplicate this. Notion folks, if you're still watching, I would love to have the insert left and right function back that we used to have it back in the day. But let's change this to a status display property, and I'm gonna create a formula, of course. So this will tag a number of really fun features that that we have not seen yet, and that people I think will appreciate. So in old days, we would have said something like, if date, for example, is today. So we want to create a status that shows like a display based on like a
different color if it's urgent or something.
How recent the thing is, right? Yeah. So so we could say something like, due date. And so the thing with dates, and we're going to use variables to start. So we'll say due date, and I want to say due date, and I want to format it. So due date is going to give us like time as well as if there's any time set on there. So we want to make sure that it's converted to just the date, and we can use date format for that.
So just confirming, you're like defining a variable with that first due date.
Yeah. So the way that lets work is, and there's also the let version of this, which defines one variable. So it's like the name of the variable you want to create. So you can say my var, and then the variable definition, like the value of the variable comes after the comma, and then the last thing is the return of it. And you can see here that my var actually shows up as a thing I can use in the sidebar, so it like almost becomes part of the documentation. So that would return 1, but I could do like my var plus my var. Each time I reference it, it uses the same value that I have stored in it. So that's like a variable concept. So I could say due date or something, and I could say, let's take the due date property and we'll call format date on it. And we want to use the year, month, day. You can put dashes in between it. And due date, that doesn't work. Due date. That's a whole nother different date. So this will show we set due date to format date. Why isn't that working? That's interesting. That should work. Oh, because there is no due date on the one I was editing. Different property. Confused myself. So that's date. There we go. Okay, so that gives us the date formatted. There's this new function that is super handy in Formulas 2.0 called parse date. And parse date uses this ISO 8601 standard. If you don't know what that is, go Google it, or you look it up on Wikipedia. But it's basically like a global standardized format for dates. So if you're not like a weird American and you use the completely nonsensical version of American dates, like you probably use something like ISO dates. And if everything in the world was ISO dates, I think we would avoid a lot of conflict. But that's
we'd have world peace.
Yes. No time zones and ISO dates. We've solved every problem. No, I'm just kidding. But basically parse date parse date allows us now to, I can just say parse date and like, what's today? The 22nd. So I can say 2023, 09, 22 as a string, and it gives me a date object. So back in the days in Formulas 1, you used to have to go look up the timestamp that was like the milliseconds from, you know, midnight in 1970, a Unix timestamp, and then you had to use the from timestamp to convert it into a date. But this allows us to just pick an arbitrary date and use it. So we can do stuff like parse date dot date between, and I could say now, and I want that in days, and that just gives me like how far is it. So if I change this to a date in the past, that's 7 days in the past because it's negative. So this is like really nice for when we need to like calculate timing based on a specific date or something like that, which I've used before many times. So yeah, so here we're taking the date and we're formatting it into just the years, months, and dates, and then we recall parse date on it to turn it back into, so the date format date turns it into a string, and then parse date turns it back into a date object. So now I can do date calculations on it. And then I want to do the same thing for now. So I might say now.format date, and we'll do the same thing here. And I can say parse date. Now I can compare the two as like dates very effectively.
From now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I could do something like, and I'm going to nest an if statement in here. So the return result of this if statement is going to be the return result of lets. And ifs is also a new concept in Formulas 2. It extends we used to have to do, if we were doing if statements, I might say if, let's say due date equals now date, then I want to show today. Otherwise, I want to show other, right? So if I say done, we see that the due date, the one that has the date of today, shows today, and everything else shows other. But like we also want to show like yesterday and, you know, the day
Coming
before,
soon.
yeah,
Yeah.
or like overdue or something like that. And so in previous Notion, we would have had to, the other conditions would have had to be what's called a nested if statement. So I would have said something like if, and then I would put in another thing here. So like, and what we'll do actually is I need to know days between these two dates. So let's do days between as a new variable, and we'll do, what is it? Due date, date between, and I want the date between the due date and now date, and I want that in days. It expects 3 arguments. So here's, because I haven't finished my function. Yeah. Okay. So now, for example, we want to test if, let's say, first of all, let's figure out what days between looks like, just to make sure. I always confuse the order. Okay. So -2. Yeah, that looks right. So September 22nd is 2 days before today, and this is 1 after today. So that's correct. Okay, so now we want to, if days between is -1, then we know it's yesterday. So let's put that on a new line. And we want to output yesterday. Otherwise, we'll do our other thing again. And let's clean that up and Command Enter. And do we have a yesterday date? We don't. Let's put the one in here. Yesterday was the 21st, and that displays yesterday. But now we have like, what if we had like 7, 8, whatever, how many of these conditions that we want to test for and show a different thing based on this? We keep having to do these nested if statements. Now, ifs is really cool because I can actually literally just like change this to ifs and it still works. But what I can do is I can actually delete this.
And like collapse it.
I can delete that, and everything goes on the same vertical or horizontal line.
Ooh.
And I like to pair these together and maybe even put them on the same line. You'll see how much this cleans this up. So ifs takes, again, it takes condition value if pairings. So I can say, I can pass as many of these as I want. So, and it goes down the list, and whichever one evaluates true first will be returned, and it will stop evaluating. So if it's today, then it'll show today. If it's yesterday, then it'll show this. And we can keep adding these conditions as we go down the page. So I might say something like, what else do we need? Days between is 1 tomorrow. And if you wanted to do like, days between is between like 7 and 14, you could put next week, or let's say like, we'll do the default is coming up, or no, that's a silly way to, let's say upcoming. And maybe we want days between is negative. We want to say overdue.
Now, hopefully folks
Okay.
that used to do all these nested if statements can just see how much cleaner and simpler that is to write.
Yeah. So now we've got our system before that shows like today, overdue, tomorrow, upcoming, overdue, like these kind of things. And this helps us like, visually understand what's going on.
Now do we get to do the pretty formatting?
Yeah. So I think, in old timey
Old
Notion,
times.
we would maybe insert a what happened to my
Emoji or
alert? Yeah. So maybe we want the double, like overdue is like, oh shit. And maybe today we want just like 1 exclamation point. Yesterday, or maybe today just doesn't have that. And yesterday is like technically overdue as well. So we'll do 1 there. And like I can hit done here, and we can see now we've got some like visualness here. So if I sorted these by date ascending, we can see everything at the top is overdue with exclamations, and then today is tomorrow and upcoming or whatever. But what's really cool about formulas too is we have this new function called style. And style is something that you can apply to any string output. So let's say my overdue tasks, I want to style. I can say, you can use a style function, and style accepts any number of strings, what I call style strings, and then also color strings. So the first thing I might want to do is bold this. And all we do for styling bold is any of the short codes that you can use in Notion's text editor, like italics would be I, S would
like
be strike
markdown?
through. Similar kind of, yeah. So you can underline with U, you can turn it into a code block with C. So I could, if I put in C here, you'll see that it turns it into code or whatever. So I would put in here, I want this to be bold, and I also want it to be red. And in fact, I want a red underscore background on that one to be like super obvious. And to maybe today's is just, maybe yesterday's is also red, but I don't want it to be like as extreme with the
like
bolding
yellow,
and all that.
orange,
Yeah. And maybe today is not today. I'm like writing what I'm saying. Maybe today is orange and tomorrow is yellow. So like the redness of the thing is, and then, maybe you want upcoming to be something else or something, like we want this to be italic.
Louis made a comment that, or you can style variables that are arrays and use that inside style. Is that
correct? Yes. Cool. Yeah. So now we've got this visualization where like I don't know about y'all, but like what we had previously when it was all just text, like there was very little visual like demarcation of like importance there. And so, when we talk about design styles, we talk about the difference in size, the difference in placement, the difference in color, and so now we've got this like sort of, we're building like an importance level here. So that's how you use styling. And of course, there's also a corresponding unstyle function. So if I called unstyle in the whole thing, it'll remove all the styles from it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I imagine
And-
like combining some of this formatting with the stuff you were doing at the readiness, it's like show that as green if it's, above 75 or
Totally,
something like
yeah.
that. You could start to get really playful with that stuff.
Yeah. The only thing you would lose there is that once you convert something to a string, it's no longer a number, and so you would lose the ring output if you wanted to have that display kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
How are we doing for time? Got another 15?
Yeah, I know. Like I've got a bit of a hard stop at 11:30. I don't know if there's more questions that we can answer
Any other
for
questions
folks,
that
or
we could talk about? I'm trying to
yeah,
think.
like I might
going
have
through
missed
all
some
of
in here.
the. We talked a little bit. We've showed some lists. We showed some date stuff. What else is new?
Oh, Marcus was asking, can you combine it with status? Just say overdue when it's not done. So you can be like checking action's status. So if it's not done yet, you could say overdue if the date has passed.
Yeah, totally. And that would be our first thing there. Like we might say something like if status is anything but done, then it would you could show something there or whatever. So, and that might be a good place for a nested if or something there. Yeah, so all the statuses that you want to check would be if status
So you can kind of
does not
combine
equal
date
done.
and status.
Then we use the if statement to display that. Otherwise, we show nothing, something like that.
It's a good point. It's almost like you don't need to run that on all things that are done. You only need to run this on.
Yeah. So that would be a place for a nested if, or we could probably just put that at the beginning of this if statement to like basically add like a trigger, a trip switch there. So if the status is done, then show nothing. And that way it will just continue on through that list there. So when I say done, then that's going to hide. And maybe you might even put something that's like, you could get pretty fun with this, if status is in progress, you could put something like, let's go. And I want it to be underlined and I want it to be green on the go. Right. So then I could be like, all right, let's do this.
Tweets. That's awesome. There's a question around the now function. So is there a today equivalent of the now bracket function, as in returns just today's date without the time attached?
No, that's something that I've asked for, but I do have a solve for that. Now to today. Here's how that looks. So yeah, so you can do, for example, here's now to today. We take the date, we format the date as the YYY. So just the without the time, and then you call parse date on that, and that removes the time. Parse date's kind of neat because it will take any not defined part of that ISO 8601 string and will default to the nearest thing. So I'll show you real quick here. Parse date, and I can say, let's say, today is again 2023 09 22. You'll see that we get the date there, and if I type an H for the hour and I typed like 11:18, what is the format? I can't remember. There you go. So that actually adds the date to it. But yeah, you'll note here that if I just put in here, there's no time, but watch what happens if I remove the date, the actual day number from this event. It goes to September 1st because that's the beginning of the time zone. So it's like kind of a trip code to get to specific places in dates. And you can do some kind of clever stuff to figure this out. For example, if I just put in 2023, default month, the beginning of that period is January 1st. So it goes right back to that period. So you can do some fancy calculation here. And so in this solve, I've got now to today, which is showing me like the now time converted to the beginning of the day. And then now to month is the same thing, but we've just dropped that DD and that goes right to the beginning of the month. So yeah, you've got your date time to today, that kind of thing. So those are those examples. So pretty simple.
Oh, Stephen asked a good question about business days. Are there any any easier ways to get the number of business days between two dates with the new
No, I
formulas?
haven't done a solve for that one yet, but like that is something that I think that would be definitely a sweet feature to ask,
Mhm.
like as an actual function, because it's quite a bit more complex. I don't have the solve on me right now, and it's a bit of a brain melter at times, and I
Yeah.
probably wouldn't want to try to do it live.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's possible, and I can post the solve for it later.
It's solvable, just not right here live right now. So
Yeah,
totally doable.
I mean, I'm sure that there are some people that have written that formula a number of times that could do it live, but I'd have to really think about it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and that definitely is. I think Coda might actually have that as a feature in their formulas language, where you can actually
Interesting.
specify business days. But yeah, like as a productivity app where we're often working and doing work related stuff, that would be a super handy feature for them
Yep.
to follow. Um,
Definitely.
oh,
Neil was
thanks.
asking. Oh, was it?
Oh, I was just reading Albert's comment. He said, "Solve these nuts."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Albert, I will happily solve these nuts. You've got to give me some kind of more context of what I'm solving for, though. Like I've definitely solved these nuts in other languages before, but not formulas. So I need a little more context about those nuts.
Anyway, Neil was asking, you mentioned GitHub action automations. Do you have a
Yeah,
video on setting this up? Sorry if it's getting too technical, but was thinking about setting up a live webhook to handle API automations.
I don't have any specific videos on that. I do have, when I built a Wordle game back in Formulas 1.0, which coincidentally would be a lot easier to solve with 2.0 and lists. I do have some examples of running a node-based JavaScript script that targets the Notion API on my GitHub that I can share with you. If you want to hit me on Twitter at type1error, I can happily share that with you. Don't have any specific walkthroughs or how-tos. It's pretty complicated stuff because you're having to, GitHub Actions, you're basically defining like a language that describes like a server that you want to run temporarily, install some software on, run a script against it, and then shut down that server. So you basically it's like cloud computing stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, super nerdy. I'm here for it too, Tasia. I know we got a pretty technical question too around auto-populating a work schedule for a team and stuff. And we're coming up toward the end of the session, so we can't really answer this.
Yeah.
But I thought, Ben, it might be a chance to talk about the course and kind of the way that you use the solves database, because we have our students submit like, hey, how do I do this particular scenario? And Ben goes through, solves it, documents it so you can see the whole thing. That is the best way to get this kind of custom support. So Ben, I'll kind of open up to you if you want to share kind of, you shared a little bit about behind the course, but maybe you could talk a bit about this sort of solves database and how you do this.
Yeah. I mean, these are mostly, I capture feedback from everywhere, including like people commenting on my YouTube channel or people that have bought our course and are part of that training and the live events that we do. So typically I have like sort of obviously a pecking order of people that get solves, people that are paying me to teach them and stuff tend to get priority, but then I get like I'll sometimes get sniped on something that sounds really interesting
Like a
that
fun,
somebody
juicy
has
problem.
done. I wanted to ask Stephen actually about like his like gaming history, because a couple of the Japanese Notion ambassadors have actually created like fully on interactive 2-player games in Notion formulas where you've got like a
Wow.
paddle that you're moving around and they're shooting back and forth. And so like, and using the text outputs with emojis to cover, like to actually display a game board. And so something that's been stuck in my head for a while is I really want to recreate chess in Notion, where you could actually play a chess game with describing the moves and, knight to whatever and moving and actually displaying a game board, because all of the chess pieces are in the emoji sets, in the deeper emoji set. So I think you could visually display a chess game, and that might be really fun to try. So it's stuff like that if you ask me a really interesting question, I might solve it for you and share it with you publicly. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. I love it's really nerdy.
And I mean, where would be a good place to do that other than, students in the course? Like, should people comment on your YouTube channel?
Yeah,
with-
follow my YouTube channel. I'm gonna start doing more shorter videos. I'm trying to grow things there, and follow
Maybe
my
you could drop
Twitter.
your link in the chat for folks
Yep.
if you want more of the technical stuff. Like, Ben gets definitely into a lot more of the sort of advanced technical side of Notion on his channel. So definitely check that out if that's something interesting to you. Oh, you're muted, Ben.
I was just saying we got 5 minutes left. I'm just gonna scan and see if there's any
Gotcha.
kind of
Let us
other
know. Like, I know we
questions.
can't answer any sort of deep dive questions at the moment, but if there's anything, if there's anything we can answer that doesn't involve Ben screen sharing or going into something
Yeah, I
too
posted my
detailed, we're happy to answer.
YouTube link in the chat, and
Perfect.
yeah,
The
Stephen
solves
says,
database is handy because it's like people ask the same kind of questions over and over again. So it's just nice to have that database that we can point to and be like, oh yeah, we already solved that for somebody, because a lot of the solves are very common, right? They're things that lots of people are bumping up against. So it's just a way to document.
and they tend to be. I'll share my screen again real quick. Let's see here. So it tends to be like more like there'll be specific solves. Like this one was interesting. Like the allowance per week. Somebody was trying to figure out like if I pay my daughter $5 a week, how do I calculate how much I paid her over these periods? So really simple stuff like that. And then the other stuff you get into, like this was a good one that I thought was really interesting from the so this one's like finding index with multiple items. So how do we find the index of things that exist in multiple lists? Or this one has been coming up a lot, and so this is like a sort of like high level version of this. Like, how do I sort a relation by a property on the database that it's related to? And so this is one that we've been solving pretty readily, where here, this is one I did for Thomas Frank when he was building this example early on. So he took it and made it like super amazing. But how do we, for example, we have a channels database and a videos database with views. We want to sort those videos by the number of views or whatever. So here's this sort of videos display thing that we did, and this is quite a complex one. And so we're basically mapping over the views, and we sort the numeric views by descending. So we use sort and reverse to reverse them. And then we have to do this. This is kind of where it gets into some complex stuff. In order to compare a nested map with the parent map, we have to redefine the current variable so that the two don't conflict. So I'm then comparing the views and the current views, and that returns each video for that views. So we're basically saying, like, give me the map of numbers, and then we're going to go over that list of numbers and find the video associated with that. So there's lots of ways to do this. And you'll see down here, this is where we actually display those numbers. And this is where Thomas gave me these amazing, like, the guy's regex skills are second to none. So like
what am I looking
at? Yeah, like what actually is this? This is actually taking a number and formatting it with commas, and where because we can't just do that, which it would be really cool if we could actually pass a string to the format function, like numeric or something, numbers with commas or something like that. But right now, in order to format a number as a string, we have to do these really complex regex functions. So
I would just be curious. I'd love to know how people are feeling, looking at some of this. Is it intimidating? Are people excited to jump in? Like, where are you at in your, formulas learning journey? Someone asked me, like, Marie, what's the first thing that you'll do with this knowledge from today? I definitely want to go and clean up my journals, clean up a lot of the places where I'm using rollups, like even in my knowledge base. I think that's another really good one. Like, I have quotes from books and related authors and things like that. Switching some of those rollups to formulas so that I can actually interact with that data faster is definitely something I'm going to go and clean up. And, to be sure, I need to go through Ben's course, because it's one thing to watch Ben do it. And I was like, oh, I totally get this now. And I went off to write one, and I, bumped up against an issue right off the bat. And so I know that the knowledge is not totally ingrained yet, like the syntax and really understanding what's happening. So I want to say, I know it takes some time for this stuff to sink in. And, it's not something that might click right away if this, you know, if you're not a programmer or these things aren't second nature to you. So it does take a little bit of learning.
I'll be totally honest too. Like I've been writing various types of code for close to 15 years, and I've been literally writing 8 hours of Notion formulas minimum a day for the last like 2 months. So yeah, it takes a long time for these like concepts to kind of stick. And once they do, like something will be like, whoa, like I can build
I
anything
get it
with
now.
this.
The matrix, it all
Yeah,
opens up.
so we've only had the features only been out for a couple of weeks now, so it's, you know, it's gonna take some time to get out into the community consciousness in that way.
And I'm sure, you know, lots of the ambassadors here, there's many in the chat, checking out their Twitter accounts. Like you're going to see people are going to start to get really creative with what they're putting out there. So I have no doubt there's going to be more videos, more documentation, people just showing what's possible. So it's fun. It's pretty fun times. So we're excited.
Amazing.
I know we're at the 90-minute mark and I'm going to have to jet, but I hope that you folks enjoyed this. I hope it was fun to dig into it a little bit, to meet some of the folks on the Notion team and to just kind of see what's possible with formulas.
I had a blast.
Yeah,
glad we figured out the technical issues. Like, I don't know if there'll be 5 minutes of us swearing at technology at the beginning of the recording. Let's hope not.
I've already learned some lessons for the next live stream, so we'll be doing it a little differently next time. But yeah, thanks to everybody who made the time to be here. Definitely go check out Ben's Formula Fundamentals 2.0 course. If you are a student of Notion Mastery, you already have access, and you will have access to the new course stuff. So yeah, we're excited to see some of you behind the scenes. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend and have fun nerding out over formulas this weekend.